Welcome to The Bridge TV, the voices of emerging communities. I'm your host, Dorinda Angelucci. Today, I am with Lou Kirven. He is a sports, media, and real estate entrepreneur. Lou, thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited about this topic. You're going to talk about a little bit of gaming and how things are changing here in the tri-state area. So let's hop right in and get our audience involved.
Sure. So New York State started a process last year that's called the New York State Downstate Gaming Process. And New York State, through the New York State Gaming Commission, is actually looking to have several applications beginning next year for from different casino companies and real estate developers for casino sites in New York City.
So just to be clear for my audience, we're talking about gaming and referring to casino gaming, not digital e-gaming. That's a whole different structure.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we're talking bricks and mortar, sort of traditional casinos like you would find in Las Vegas or Atlantic City. There's some confusion because there's also a lot of activity around online gaming and online sports betting. But
Not that.
right now we're talking right now about the bricks and mortar casino gaming.
So is this because people were trying or commuting up to was it Foxwood, and is this that we're tapping into that marketplace to come downstate here? That's what they're tapping into?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let me answer that in a couple of different ways. Nationally, historically we had casino gaming in Nevada, and then probably beginning about 30 years ago or more in Atlantic City. And then increasingly there was more local or regional gaming. So the industry has, attempted to try to get closer and closer to population centers, which was not the case. So on one end, you have some of the more, local regional gaming, like you mentioned in Connecticut, that have gotten closer. But in New York State, that's a whole separate thing. So in New York State, historically, there have been casinos, commercial type casinos on native lands, which are regulated and legalized by the federal government, and those are primarily upstate. But beginning about 10 or 12 years ago, New York State actually started to put in process a way to make casino gaming legal here.
So what is this also to get, of course, tax dollars, fundraise for the state?
Sure, that's part of it. You have the pressures from the state to always try to find additional tax revenues, and this becomes one industry in which, the industry says, hey, if you allow us to open up in your state, get closer to your population centers, and customers, we can make money, and you can tax and you can make money. So that's one part of it.
Right. But this is not going to try to be like the next Atlantic City.
Well, there's only 3 licenses
Okay.
that are being allowed. So in some communities, like in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, there's no limit onto the number of licenses. Under the New York State Constitution, which was amended, which the voters of New York State approved a referendum approximately 12 years ago, it allows for 7 licenses throughout New York State. Now, the first 4 licenses were issued in the first round about 10 years ago. So this process happened upstate, and so there's now 4 commercial casino licenses. There's one in the Catskills, and then there's 3 others throughout, upstate New York.
Do you feel that our communities, do we have the space for this? I mean, you're a real estate expert also. Do we have the real estate to handle this type of influx of people and concentrations?
Yeah, it's a good question. So typically, like in the case of the upstate casinos, the whole thinking was that there's plenty of space, there's plenty of land, and casinos could build the typical casino resorts that you'd find in Atlantic City or in Nevada. The difference here, obviously, in a very dense, built-out locality, there's very very few places where you can find that. What's unique about Aqueduct and Empire City, Yonkers Raceway, was that they were racetracks, and you had plenty of space. So 15 years ago, that was the thinking behind starting there. But there's plenty of other proposals now for downstate which aren't going to have the same amount of land. So in many ways, they're going to go up. And so they're going to be more, they're going to be more vertical than horizontal.
I really think the community members are going to be very concerned about the traffic, the schools, how close the casinos are to some of their, their residency. This is important. We understand we need the money here in the city. We're always talking about a shortage, but how are we going to control that? How are they going to police that? And how is that able to even be managed in our dense New York?
Right. So, no, that's a very good question. So, as you know, in New York City, you have community boards, right? Yes. And typically any land use, and particularly major land use projects, go through what they call the ULURP, process in New York City. This situation has changed a little bit by the fact that the New York State gaming statute, the legislation, incorporated something called a community advisory committee. So right now, the community is basically going to have their say through these CACs, less so through the ULURPs. Now, individual projects may be going through ULURP for certain reasons, but even like with zoning, the mayor put forward a zoning text amendment, which was just approved by the city council. So now any of these projects, if they're approved through the community advisory committee and they come back up to Albany to the gaming commission for consideration, if they're approved, they will automatically have zoning. So that's a change here. So some of the community boards are not happy about that, but that's now a fact of the way it's so. What the community is going to have to do if they really have objections to projects is they're going to really have to have their voices made through these committees, and these committees are going to be made up of elected representatives at each site. So the governor's going to have a representative, the mayor will have a representative, the borough president will have a representative, as well as the state senator, state assembly person, the city council. So once again, it's really important that you vote, you know who's in office, you don't let any of the topics go unnoticed, read the little fine print, check the little box. Right. You have to do your part, always. You have to do your part. Now, one of the things that's going to be confusing for the community is that, while this process started a year ago, there's been delays, and so it's not happening quickly. Part of the reason is because, as you were just asking about size and different things, these are big projects. And so, there was concern about zoning, which is now kind of gotten resolved. There's also concern about seeker. So we have something called seeker in the city. It's with a C, but it's an environmental quality review act. And that, again, allows the community to weigh in on traffic, noise, pollution, and other aspects that can affect neighborhoods and community.
So we're not losing Aqueduct. Well, we are losing Aqueduct, right? Aren't we losing that racetrack?
Well, there's discussions about redevelopment of that, both within the gaming, a gaming project, but there's other discussions around the best way to unlock sort of all that land there.
And what about, you said before you worked with Yonkers Raceway? That was where you got your start, Yonkers Raceway? Yeah. I remember Yonkers Raceway. I was not supposed to be there to sneak in with my dad. So that's a lot of family memories. But what's happening in Yonkers with Yonkers Raceway with this? Are they expanding? Are they going to adapt to the casino model?
So one of the reasons why, I've had a front row seat to a lot of this is because I was hired by Empire City at Yonkers Raceway back in 2012, just as a lot of this was started. I was actually hired to help the company win one of these licenses when it was all starting, and the belief was that both upstate and downstate was all going to happen very quickly. Now, Empire City had converted just a few years earlier from strictly a racetrack to a video lottery terminal facility, which for all intents and purposes appears to be a casino.
Right.
That's the same with Aqueduct.
And what really underlying is the difference? It looks like to regular Joe, it's a casino, but it's not, because what's the one thing that's missing?
Yeah.
What is it? What is it again?
It's a great question. So basically, in commercial casinos like in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, you have machines that are controlled on that at that site. Okay. In the case in New York State, remember when you go back in time, the New York State Constitution said no gambling allowed.
Okay.
Right? It was prohibited by the New York State Constitution. The only thing that was allowed was horse racing and New York State Lottery. So what the lawyers figured out was that if they put video lottery terminals at Aqueduct and Yonkers Raceway, and they basically ran a line directly up to New York State Lottery in Schenectady, then New York State Lottery would control those machines. Those machines being controlled by New York State Lottery is legal under the New York State Constitution, and so that's how those things were born.
So what about people being addicted and dealing with the pressures of, you're making more accessible ways for people kind of to gamble and bet, and even if you camouflage it with machinery, it's still feeding into the addictive level of having people spend money and, not controlling themselves and making it actually easier. I mean, is there anybody thinking about that, or is it just all about the finance?
Yeah, that's actually the most important question. And something that that's very important to me. So, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to come on today and have this discussion, because I think it's really important that as a community that we're aware of it. Now, there's plenty of people in the community that are aware of that this activity is occurring and immediately have concerns that gaming can be negative to communities, right? And so at the same time, there are people who do enjoy,
Grandma still goes, they take the bus, they're having a great time. Yes.
Some people enjoy this form of entertainment, but the key is can they handle it, and can they do it responsibly? So the industry clearly wants to, promote, opportunities to get closer to population bases, their clients, because it makes it easier. From the community perspective, we have to make sure that we do it in the right way. The industry talks about responsible gaming, which is, their efforts to make sure that they minimize people becoming addicted. But the truth is that there are issues there too. There are different organizations that focus on this. There's one organization called Stop Predatory Gambling, which is probably the most vocal, which the industry doesn't really want to hear from, because they view many people in the industry as promoting gambling for those purposes, and actually want people to become a little bit more addictive, and in that respect.
So I'm really curious, Lou. Like, whatever happened to off-track betting then? What, do you know how does that play out, or how did it play out in your arena as an expert on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and it sort of ties into how this gaming process started. So the racetracks throughout New York State were in decline. And so, horse racing as entertainment and as, revenue both for state and for, private entities was declining over a number of years. And so, in its heyday, off-track betting came about as sort of an innovation where people could not have to go to the racetrack. They could go to a, local...
The corner store, I remember it's the green, I see it right there.
Right, and they could bet on races, and,
100%.
and business, took place there, and the off-track, betting, corporations flourished.
Yes.
For a period of time, but as horse racing and as people moved on to other things, the next generation wasn't interested, and it declined.
Lou, this business, this online sports betting, is $1 billion industry. Is there any limits, or how are we going to control it? It's like the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, it's a big business. It's a big industry. You know, the expectation is that the casino gaming, gambling industry is about a $60 billion industry nationwide, and that online sports betting, online gaming would probably be about 25 to 30% of that. So that's upwards of 12 to 15 billion dollars.
So who's getting the cut though? What is the
Yeah, that's a good question. So a lot of this was illegal, right? It was offshore or bookies, handle it. And in the last 10 years now, it's coming online. All of the sports leagues now,
right.
The NFL for the longest said that they didn't want anything to do with sports gambling. Now all of the sports leagues and the ownership of the teams have gotten into it because they've seen the revenues. Because there's not only just the gambling, but there's so much more. The advertising behind it, the media has been tremendous. It's created cottage industries and media. A lot of the sports networks now have created gambling
apps and
networks,
yeah.
As well as the technology. You can't. Every state is different. So the apps may work in some states, but they don't work in other states.
Yeah, I had a friend. She said her person bet on a game, but she went out of state, and then she couldn't get the money, and then they had to show ID. It was a big mess. I mean, she finally got her money, thank goodness. But
right, because there's technology called geofencing. So there's actually they know where your phone is at, and where
is
you've
that
registered.
Supposed to help prevent you from betting out of state? That's correct, or betting where it's illegal?
It's just trying to make sure that that the legal activity is occurring, in the state where it's legal as opposed to somewhere else.
Okay.
Now, it still doesn't address issues related to, youth and other people becoming addicted, which is, something that I'm looking at and think that there are ways that the industry could better serve the community and individuals. The industry manages itself in terms of responsible gaming. But we think there's other things that could be done to educate the community, to recognize addictive behaviors, as well as ways perhaps to try to correct it.
I know there's a habit you're supposed to do, like 20 on, 20 off when you're doing anything like technology. Maybe 20 minutes on the get thing, or you can't have to skip a day, or maybe there's a cutoff default factor. But we have to do that with gaming with our our young people, is turn it off, get them off of it.
Yeah.
It's hard, but that's supposed to be some kind of rule that parents are supposed to try to stick to with young people gaming electronically.
Right.
I don't know if that'll work for adults, but it's a very hard situation.
I think it is a tough issue, but as adults and as communities, which is sort of represented by our government and our leadership, we shouldn't be allowing certain things for underage people, right? Now, do they?
No.
Young people are young people.
No,
are they
they know how to make another password. They know how to make a fake birthday.
Right.
They actually know how to make a fake driver's license.
Right.
They could.
But we don't want to. But we don't want to make it easy for them.
100%.
Especially
100%.
in terms of our laws. And they're the most technologically astute. So those who really want to try to figure out ways around it, they're going to do that. But if we have laws in place, then the companies also will be held accountable, and we'll make sure that they don't risk. In this industry, the biggest concern is always about losing their license. If they lose their license, they're out of business. So there are ways to keep these companies and industry accountable.
Louis, there's no secret. There's no secret that I went to Syracuse. We bleed orange. We're all connected. It's all about our athletes who we know.
I want to hold that against you.
You want to hold? Don't hold it against me. I'm a DC fan forever. But what's happening now is sports athletes and these young people actually are having a chance to make money on their name, image, and likeness.
Right.
That's completely brand new. I'm an 89 person. So explain that a little bit to our viewers and our community, how maybe they have a college-bound athlete and how things are changing and how their college-bound athlete could actually start making money as an undergraduate.
Sure. So in a nutshell, over the last 30, 40 years.
I just dated myself then. Thank you. Go ahead.
College sports has become a huge business, right? And, people like Jim Boeheim at Syracuse and John Thompson at Georgetown, you go back to the 80s, they were just, coaches who coached for the love of it. And then they saw, the sport change, and, coaches started benefiting, just like the colleges started benefiting from huge sports media, contracts. And so the industry just took off. And so billions of dollars have been made. And over the years, people have asked, well, what about the athletes, the student athletes? And, the colleges often said, year after year, decade after decade, well, they're student athletes. Many of them are getting scholarships, they're getting free room and board. They should
Free cars, but go ahead, we're not talking about
not officially.
Not officially.
Not officially.
Go ahead.
But they should be happy with that.
Right.
But we also know that there are plenty of cases where even with, free room and board, that wasn't enough for a lot of these athletes.
100%.
There are famous stories of athletes on every campus
100%.
who, couldn't get by.
And also a lot of those athletes are supporting families back home, so it's hard. It was
hard. But so the issue of whether or not there should be compensation in some way has been around for a long time. But in 2021, finally, name, image, and likeness was finally legalized, so college students could at least get compensated, for abilities to become brand ambassadors on campus.
Right.
They couldn't get paid for actually playing the sport, because again, you don't want any situations where somebody might get paid and then it bleeds into the activity on the field. But anything else, endorsing a product or trying to become a spokesperson, they could get compensated. So that started a few years ago. But there's a whole bunch of issues right now with NIL. It hasn't gotten off smoothly. It's a bit of the wild, wild west.
Yes.
And you have situations where collectives, which are sort of the old boosters
Yes.
on every campus and college, have sort of taken over, and they're actually using NIL to give athletes cars and money and other things to try to get them to recruit.
And entice them to skip and hop places. Is that correct?
Exactly.
There's no brand loyalty now.
Right. So between that and the other change is the transfer portal. So now students once they're past their freshman year can easily move, which might be good, or it gives a little bit more freedom.
Right.
But when you combine that with the ability to compensate them and incentivize them, one of the stalwarts and the most successful football coaches of the last decade or more is Nick Saban of Alabama. He just retired, and I believe part of his concern is because of NIL, how that's just sort of misconstruing
The athletes
and
and
changing sort of the
because
whole
isn't
dynamic of everything.
Isn't Atlanta one of the first colleges to really kind of accept that type of the NIL format for their athletes? Because I know they don't do it at Syracuse, is my understanding. It's not in play at this point.
Well, I think every school now has embraced NIL in some form. Some are more aggressive than others, but
Right.
definitely Syracuse and every school has the former boosters who are now collective,
Sure.
who have been operating. There's there's talk of trying to get Congress involved, so they create a federal system or laws that would make it equal across the. But as we know, Congress
how
right
could
now,
they do that? Isn't
nothing's
it-
getting passed in
If
Congress.
if you're a lead player or a starter, you have more game than the next guy, then he gets a better deal. That's not even. It's not going to be even. Not everybody has the same strength. Isn't this all about the fact that who you are and how marketable you are as an athlete, that you're going to get the better deal?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yes.
I think the question is how can we put it into a system that makes it again above board and will be in the best interest of sort of all the parties involved.
Maybe just put caps on it. Is that fair?
I mean that's part of the debate. Should they have caps?
Right.
I think I've heard of as I've looked at this space,
Yes.
there's an interesting idea that that's called like true NIL, and so how do you treat student athletes similar to all students on campus?
Right.
So if you have a brilliant student at Syracuse, comes up with a great idea, there's no cap on them in terms of, if they create some new idea or some new invention.
That's true.
So why should we limit athletes similarly?
Right.
Now, on college campuses, they're not pros, right? Once they get to the pros, and for decades, the pros have dealt with that debate of whether or not they have, caps and salary caps and,
Understood.
and different things, which again, may or may not make sense. From the business side, sometimes you want that because you can't have unlimited
Access.
expenses.
I guess it's the same thing. It's a little bit going back to, I think the concern is these are younger people. We're talking about people in their 17, 18, 19th year. They're not as fluent with their money yet. So
Right.
it's again back to starting the whole, are you making addictive behaviors? Are you feeding into patterns? And if you start earlier giving them so much money, then it could actually tailspin, even making a worse situation, making your own kind of like celebrity monsters under 20. So
Right.
I think that's a little bit of that.
I think like with everything, with young people, you want to try to give them to the best that we can the right sort of value system.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Especially as they're sort of forming.
Formative years, 100%.
In their formative years,
100%.
exactly. I think with NIL, it has great promise, right? Because it's now giving them an opportunity to do different things and to benefit. Most people become athletes because they enjoy the sport,
Yes,
right?
right.
Some people also see it as an opportunity to get, a higher
And
education.
Yep.
And which are all good things.
Right.
And at the same time, if they can turn pro and really be compensated, that's good. A majority, 98% don't.
Right.
But are there ways for them to be compensated, for what they're
Sure.
doing on campus, while they're on campus, as well as maybe, for the rest of their lives?
Maybe it
because
could
they
all
have,
be put in a trust.
yeah,
Something where you can't touch it. Just, you can get the offer for the $1 million blank, blank, blank sneakers, but you can't touch it until you get to be 30, hopefully.
yeah. It's a good idea, but just like with Congress, those trust funds somehow get the highway trust fund and other things somehow get
dwindle
invaded.
down too.
Yeah. So.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming and
Thank you for
sharing
having
these
me.
updates about our community and also about gambling and casinos to come. More importantly, what we learned today is definitely vote. Be aware, correct,
Right.
of different types of rules, regulations, and different types of ordinances that could be passed on your bill. So again, it's back to voting and staying on top of what's happening in your community.
Right.
Thank you so much, Lou.
Thank you.